Hey everybody, this is Aaron. I'm a community technologist at DoSpace, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to set up and use a Gmail account. And I'm also going to mention a few of the kind of features or functions that you can utilize inside of Gmail as well. So it's a pretty easy process, although it's gotten a little bit more complicated than probably the first time I set up my email address, maybe in the early 2000s, but it is still a very easy process. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to launch our web browser. It doesn't matter which web browser we're going to use. It can be Google Chrome, it can be Firefox, it can be Microsoft Edge. It doesn't really matter. But for this video, I'm actually just going to use Google Chrome. It's right down here in my taskbar. I'll open it up here. And from here, we can go right off to, I'm actually going to just do a quick search in our taskbar here for just Gmail sign up. Okay, and so from there, typically the first link that we're going to see is going to be the link that we need to click on. So from there, we can just start by creating our Google account. Okay, so as you can see here on this very first page, everything is relatively self-explanatory. We have our first name, we have our last name, then we have our username, and right below username, you can see what Google allows you to put in to that username field here: letters, numbers, and periods. So if you try to put a dash in, you try to put a symbol in, it will not work. Kind of another point that I'll make about the username is if you want it to be a professional email address, or maybe just one that you want to use for just family, definitely keep that in mind, because the username you create is what everyone will see. So if you're going to use this to be maybe applying for jobs, definitely keep that in mind. Maybe don't use anything that's explicit or maybe unprofessional if that's the purpose that you want to use it for. And after you get done with your username, definitely try to keep it clever, maybe creative. And once you go to hit the next button down here, Google will actually let you know if that is an available name. So hopefully your name is available. If not, they'll give you a few suggestions kind of on how maybe you could alter the name to get a similar name, but not that exact name. So after that, we have our password. Definitely try to use a creative or clever password. And just like with the username, right below password, Google gives us a little bit of a guideline on what they are going to require of us in terms of making a password. So we can see here, we're going to need to use at least 8 or more characters, a mix of letters, numbers, and symbols. So take the time, think through a very kind of carefully crafted password here, and definitely don't forget to utilize this little kind of eyeball here for when you're typing in your password. So if my password is password, which is not only not possible but not a good password, I can always use the eyeball to make sure that I typed in password. So whatever password that I want to create, I can always use that eyeball to make sure that what I think I've typed, I've actually typed. So definitely go ahead and use that. I'm going to fill this out, and I'll see you guys on the next page. Okay, so once you finish that first page, filling out your first and last name, and you get a username and a password that's acceptable, it's going to take you to this page here. And this page is really kind of a secondary kind of authentication page. I think the vast majority of it is optional, but I definitely would recommend that you fill out every aspect of this page that you feel comfortable filling out. In terms of phone number, that's a pretty obvious what they're asking for. You don't have to fill it out, but once again, I would definitely recommend it. And it isn't so that Google can kind of send ads to your phone or something like that. It really is just very similar to the recovery email just below it. It really is just in case you get locked out of your account. Google has another way to allow you to prove that you are you. So 100%, I would definitely recommend either including a phone number or some sort of a recovery email address, just in case you get locked out of your account. Working at DoSpace, I've seen it a couple of times where a person forgets their password or maybe even forgets their username and they're fully locked out of their account. It's very difficult for Google or any other company to kind of have you prove or kind of have you prove your identity to them. But with your telephone number or with a secondary email address, they don't really even have to bother with you proving that you are them. They'll just text that phone number or they'll send an email to that secondary email address with the option that's going to allow you to reset your password. So it could potentially save you a lot of headache by simply including either a phone number or an optional recovery email address. But a few other things that you're going to have to fill out are your birth date and your gender. Although with gender, you can kind of say custom, or you rather not say. And of course, you can kind of fub your birthday here if you so choose. But they will actually use this maybe as a little bit of a security question if you get locked out of your account. So I would try to keep it as honest as humanly possible. Once again, this page, fill out as much of this page as you feel comfortable with, but definitely keep in mind that if you get locked out of your account and you don't have an optional kind of phone number or recovery email address, you really might end up in a very tricky situation where you just don't have access to that email address anymore. So 100% either include a phone number or a recovery email address. And keep in mind that if you do include a phone number on this very next page, you actually are going to have to verify that phone number. So make sure that if you are including a phone number, that it is an authentic phone number. It can be a cell phone or a landline phone, but definitely make sure that you are doing, to me, one of these two options for sure, 100%. So I'm going to take the time, I'm going to fill them out, and I'll see you guys on the next page. Okay, so after you have hopefully entered in at least a recovery email address or a recovery telephone number, you'll actually see a page, not this page. You'll actually see, if you did a recovery telephone number, you will see a page that simply asks you to kind of validate that telephone number. So if you entered in a landline number, it'll probably call that number and give you a series of numbers to enter into your web browser. If you put in a cell phone number, it'll text that number and give you a series of numbers to enter into your web browser. But after you kind of go through that process and everything comes out okay, it'll take you to Google Terms and Conditions. 100% go over and read through these terms and conditions. Make sure that you kind of want to agree to them before you agree to them. But one thing I will say is that these terms and conditions are pretty standard. If you go to Yahoo, you're going to find very similar terms and conditions. If you go to Outlook, you're going to find very similar terms and conditions. So take the time, read these over, and I'm going to head over to the next page right now. Okay, so here we are. Once you agree to the terms and conditions, it takes you right into your Google account. You creating a Gmail account is not just a Gmail account, it is actually an account across all of Google, which is a huge benefit, which is one of the main reasons why I wanted to do a video over Gmail. And that is because by creating a kind of Gmail account, you also get a YouTube account, you get a Google Play account, get a Google Maps account, and just a general Google Drives account, Google Search account. It actually is a very useful account. So with that, I'm actually going to head over to Gmail and we can continue to talk about Gmail a little bit further. Okay, so the very first thing you should see is this little welcome pop out here, and it's just welcoming you to Google and the entire Google suite. And once we hit next, it's going to give us a few quick options, and you can choose whichever one that you're personally comfortable with. You have default, comfortable, compact. Personally, I prefer default, but whichever one you feel comfortable with, definitely go ahead and select it. And from there, we already have one email. Hooray, hooray. And it is just from Google welcoming us to the Google family. So as you can see here on the left-hand side here, we have our inbox. I can click on our inbox to get back to any mail that we have received. And we can easily see that message from Google. Simply by clicking on that message, we can open it, pop it out, and scroll down to check out Google's welcome message. So yeah. And there are a few other things that I kind of wanted to point out before I close out this video here. And one of them is simply how to compose a message. And that's pretty easy. As you can see, it is the biggest button on the screen here, and it's compose. And once we do that, we have the option to send a message to whoever we want to. So from there, I can send a message to, I'm actually just going to send a message to myself real quick. Okay, I'm actually just going to send a quick message to myself, but I'm not going to send it. I'm actually going to have it save as a draft so I can also show off the draft system. So from here, we can send a message to anyone. So I can just say message to me at me, which is not a real email address at all, but it's okay. We're not actually going to send it. We're going to save it as a draft. And let's say the subject, let's just say dance. Subject is dance. And the message, let's just say, hold on. All right. Yeah, we're dancing all night long here. So from here, okay, it's actually giving us a few quick kind of tutorials here, but I'm going to go ahead and dismiss it for the moment. And from here, we actually have a few different options. I'm really going to focus and talk about this kind of bottom taskbar here. And so if, let's say, for instance, I wanted to actually add a file, always go to this little paperclip, and I can attach any file that I would like to this email here. And kind of another kind of cool, neat one is the emojis little button here. And of course, this is going to give you the option to add emojis into your email address. And you, of course, have access to a lot of other things like your Google Drive. You can insert files directly from Google Drive. You can insert photos directly into the email. You can also pay people via your email as well. There are a ton of different options. But if you notice to the right of our send button, if you actually click that, we can actually schedule this, and we can schedule this to send let's say, as we can see here, 8 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the afternoon, or 8 o'clock in the morning, even 18 days later. And we can, of course, schedule and pick our own time. So let's say you're typing an email at 2 o'clock, but you didn't want it to send until 8 o'clock. You could always schedule it to send at that later date. Now, what I'm actually going to do is, of course, like I said, this is not a real email address. I'm actually going to go ahead and close it. Once I close it, we can see here there's now a 1 in my drafts tab. So we'll go down to drafts, and your drafts tab is really going to be where everything goes that you have composed but not sent. Things are automatically being saved, and if you fail to send it, it's automatically going to go there. So that's definitely something that you want to keep in mind if you're composing something and you forget about it, or if you're composing something and your computer crashes. Hopefully it will be saved in there. And so yeah, that is how drafts work. It's a pretty useful and pretty interesting feature. And a few other things. There's not too much left in Gmail. You can see it actually likes to organize things into categories. So once we start to receive real emails and real messages, it'll automatically start to organize all of our emails into categories. So if it sees something coming from Facebook, it'll automatically put it into the social category. If we see something having to do with, let's say, like a Microsoft update or maybe a Windows update or something like that, it'll go into our updates tab. There are a few other tabs that it automatically is kind of sorting things into. And we, of course, have our handy dandy trusty spam folder, which thankfully is empty. As you can see, our little hooray, no spam here message. But if I wanted to go into my inbox here, and let's say I wanted to consider this spam, I would simply click the little box here, box to the left of the message, and I would go, I could delete it if I so choose to, and I will do that before the end of this video. But if I wanted to report it as spam, I simply would click this button and I would report it as spam, and then anything else coming from that email address would automatically be considered spam. But I'm going to go ahead and delete it here. And probably the very last thing I'm going to talk about is really just this little waffle. If you ever wanted to get back to any of your other Google applications, let's say either Google Play or YouTube, you can always click on this little waffle here at the top to get to any of the other Google applications that you now have access to through your Google account. So yeah, that was my time. I hope you guys learned a lot from this video. Definitely make sure to check out dospace.org. And if you have any other questions or comments or anything like that, you can always email us at hello@dospace.org. Thanks for your time.